Avni, should we begin? Avnit, are you ready? Should we begin?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Okay. So, good evening, all. Uh, so yesterday we discussed about a play, and it was a Dancer Forest by Soinka. And today we are going to understand a very prominent writer's work who is from Pakistan, and the book that he has written is the novel that he has sorry she has written is Ice Candy Man. The author is Bapsi Sidhwa, and the novel is Ice Candy Man. Bapsi Sidhwa is a prominent Pakistani novelist, best known for her works that explore the history, culture, and social dynamics of the Indian subcontinent. Born on August 11th, 1938, in Karachi, British India, now it is in Pakistan, Sidhwa grew up in Lahore and later moved to the United States. She belongs to the Parsi community, a minority religious group in the Indian subcontinent, which has greatly influenced her writing. Sidhwa's novels often reflect the complex interplay of cultural and religious identities, the impact of historical events, and the role of women in society. Her works, written in English, have gained international recognition for their vivid storytelling and deep exploration of human experiences. Sidhwa is particularly noted for her portrayal of the partition of India in 1947, an event that led to the creation of India and Pakistan and resulted in widespread violence, displacement, and trauma. Her major works include The Crow Eaters, that was written in 1978. It is a humorous yet poignant depiction of the Parsi community in colonial India. How many of you have read The Crow Eaters? Anyone? Malshri, have you read the book? Avneet, have you?
No, ma'am, I haven't read it,
Okay,
but I
okay.
would try to
Yes,
read it.
yes. If given a chance, try finding, because these books are essential to know what exactly a writer wants to convey, and you will come to know the expansion of so many different cultures, or to that matter, lot of things you'll come to know across. Okay, there was Crow Eaters, there was The Bride. This is the also known as the Pakistani Bride. This novel explores the challenges faced by women in rural Pakistan. Ice Candy Man, it was published in 1988, and it is also known as The Cracking India. This novel is Sidhwa's most famous work and offers a child's perspective on the partition of India. Sidhwa contribution to literature have earned her numerous awards, including the Sitara E Imtiaz, Pakistan's highest national honor in the arts. The title Ice Candy Man, which is also published as Cracking India, is symbolic and metaphorical, reflecting the multifaceted nature of the story and its characters. The title refers to one of the central characters, the Ice Candy Man, who is a street vendor selling ice lollies. Do you know what are ice lollies? Any idea? What are ice lollies?
Ma'am, is it that barf ka gola that we eat
Yes,
sometimes?
yes, 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 exactly. So these are the ice candies, and in Lahore, it was during 1940s. The character embodies the duality of innocence and corruption, as well as the fragility of human morality under the pressures of societal upheaval. The Ice Candy Man is not just a character, but a representation of the larger forces at play during the partition. Forces that can be sweet and alluring, but can also shatter lives and communities when provoked. The title also alludes to the themes of fragmentation and the breaking apart of India into two separate nations, just as ice candy melts and disintegrates. So there is a lot of theme and motive involved in this novel, but we will discuss about all these things. But before that, we need to know the characters. Let's have a detailed analysis on the characters. The major character which you will find here, most of the time here, you will find that Lenny is the narrator and the protagonist. She is an 8-year-old Parsi girl, and Lenny's perspective as a child provides a unique and innocent lens through which the horrors of partitions are reviewed. Her physical vulnerability due to polio contrasts her with emotional strength as she witnesses the disintegration of her world. There is one more character who is a beautiful character, Aya. She is also known as Shanta. She is Lenny's Hindu nanny, a central figure in the novel. And Aya represents the ideal of beauty and harmony in pre partition Lahore. Her eventual abduction and forced conversion by the Ice Candy Man symbolize the brutal victimization of women during the communal violence. Then we meet Ice Candy Man. His name is Dil Nawaz. He is a Muslim street vendor, and it's a very complex character that we are going to study, who shifts from a charming and romantic figure to a symbol of the destructive forces unleashed by partition. His obsession with Aya and his subsequent actions illustrate the loss of humanity and the descents into madness that characterized the period. There is Rhoda Bai, who is also known as Godmother. This is another character, and she is Lenny's godmother, a strong and a very wise figure. Godmother represents moral authority and the voice of reason. She plays a crucial role in rescuing Aya and restoring some semblance of order amidst the chaos. There is the parents, Lenny's parents, Mrs. and Mr. Setti, and they embody the Parsi community's attempt to remain neutral and detached from the religious conflicts, reflecting the challenges faced by minorities during the partitions. We also have a cousin who is Lenny's older cousin, who introduces her to the complexities of adult relationships. The cousin's interactions with Lenny, in most of the part, you would find contributes to her coming of age and understanding of the world around her. There is Masur, a Muslim Masur who is in love with Aya. Masur represents the peaceful coexistence of different communities before partition. His death at the hands of communal violence marks the end of this harmony. So, these are the most important characters in the novel. Now, we move on to the plot of the novel. So, Ice Candy Man is set in Lahore during the turbulent period leading up to and following the partition of India in 1947. The novel is narrated by Lani, an 8-year-old Parsi girl who is afflicted with polio. Through Lenny's innocent and observant eyes, the novel portrays the devastating impact of the partition on the lives of ordinary people. The story revolves around the lives of Lenny's family and their interactions with people from different religious, and social backgrounds, including Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis. So, the Ice Candy Man, a charming and a manipulative Muslim man, is a frequent visitor to Lenny's household. He is in love with Aya, Lenny's Hindu nanny, who is a beautiful and vivacious young woman admired by many men in the community. As communal tensions arise, the harmony that once existed in the diversity of Lahore begins to unravel. The novel vividly depicts the violence, betrayal, and suffering that ensue as the partition divides the nation. The ice candy man, once a friendly figure, becomes a symbol of the madness and brutality that overtakes people during this period. His transformation reflects the larger transformation of society, where neighbor turns against neighbor and humanity is lost in the frenzy of religious and political division. The novel culminates in the abduction of Aya by a mob led by the now vengeful and deranged Candyman. Lenny, who inadvertently reveals Aya's hidden place, is left to grapple with guilt and the loss of innocence. The story ends with Lenny's family managing to rescue Aya from the clutches of the Ice Candy Man, who has forcibly married her. However, the damage has been done, and the trauma of partition leaves an indelible mark on all the characters. Ice Candy Man by Bapsi Sidhwa is divided into 32 chapters. I'll try my best to cover as many chapters, as many important chapters as possible. We will pick up the importance lines and we will talk about what each line signify. We will do a critical analysis and we will see how much we can cover up. These chapters collectively narrate the story of Lenny and the tumultuous events surrounding the partition of India, offering a detailed and poignant exploration of the impact of these events on the lives of the characters. In Ice Candy Man, certain chapters stand out, like I mentioned, particularly important due to their significant contribution to the novel's theme, character development, portrayal of the history context. So we will try to discuss all of them. So we'll start first with chapter 1. The plot of chapter 1 goes like this. It set the stage of the novel by introducing the reader to the young narrator, Lenny Sethi, and the world she inhabits in Lahore before the partition. Lenny reflects on her childhood and the people around her, particularly her Aya, who is a central figure in her life. Through Lenny's observations, the chapter establishes the social and the cultural milieu of pre-partition India, where various communities coexist relatively peacefully. This chapter is rich in imagery and symbolism, capturing the innocence of Lenny's childhood and the warmth of her relationship with those around her. Lenny's observation, though naive, hint at the underlying tensions that will later erupt with partition. The chapter also subtly introduces the reader to the themes of identity, innocence, and the complexity of adult relationships, setting the tone for the unfolding narrative. So, some of the lines, uh, let's say, I am aware of a world, but it is a world whose surface I touch. The bare brown legs of Aya's coarsely threaded, varicose veined limbs as she peels an orange and feeds me segments stained with dirt from her nails. Look at the beautiful description. This excerpt captures Lenny's innocence and her limited understanding of the world around her. The vivid description of Aya's physical presence conveys Lenny's deep connection to her. The dirt under Aya's nails juxtaposed with the sweetness of the orange, symbolizes the mix of purity and imperfection in the world Lenny is beginning to comprehend. It also highlights the sensory nature of Lenny's experiences, focusing on touch and taste, which are central to her understanding of her surroundings. The stench of earth as the gardener turns the soil mingles with the fragrant air, and I try to catch its aroma in my cupped hands. Now, this passage tells Lenny's tactile and sensory engagement with the world. The imagery of India and fragrance symbolizes the richness of her environment, filled with both beauty and decay. The gardener turning the soil can be seen as a metaphor here for the inevitable changes that will soon disrupt Lenny's world. The mingling of scents foreshadows the merging of cultures and the subsequent conflicts that will arise as a narrative progresses. Aya's touch is tender and her skin is brown and soft. She lifts me up to the sky and I feel like I am flying. This passage talks about the bond between Lenny and Aya. The tenderness in Aya's touch contrasts with the harsh reality that will later intrude upon Lenny's life. The act of being lifted up to the sky symbolizes the sense of freedom and security that Lenny feels in Aya's care. However, this sense of soaring is fleeting, hinting at the disruptions that will soon shatter her idyllic world. I watch the sunlight dance on the leaves, and I know that nothing bad can happen on a day like this. Lenny's belief that nothing bad can happen reflects her naive and the false sense of security she feels in her sheltered world. The sunlight dancing on the leaves symbolizes the fleeting nature of peace and innocence. This moment of tranquility is poignant as it stands in stark contrast to the turmoil that will soon engulf Lenny's life and the lives of those around her. The use of light and nature imagery here reinforces the theme of innocence lost. Now, this chapter is significant because it sets the tone of the entire novel. Through Lenny's innocence and sensory rich perception, the chapter introduces the reader to the world of pre partition Lahore. It establishes the key relationships in Lenny's life, particularly with Aya, who will play a central role in unfolding as we unfold with the chapters. This chapter also focuses on the sensory experiences of a child, foreshadowing the more complex and harsh realities that will later come up in the play as Lenny begins to understand the world beyond her immediate surroundings. It subtly hints at the underlying tensions in society. While the surface appears to be peaceful, the detailed descriptions of dirt, soil, mingling scents suggest there are deeper, more troubling elements at play. This foreshadowing is crucial for understanding the dramatic shifts that will occur as the story progresses. Some of the major themes in chapter 1, if we focus on that, can somebody tell me what do you find, what can be the major themes? Mostly, what can be the major themes? Anyone? Yeah, you can try. Give a try. What can be what can be the themes for chapter 1?
Ma'am, first it
Yeah.
could be the introduction about Lenny's relationship with others and the communal introduction,
Okay.
and we could study about like her surroundings, initial like which blessings, how they turned into something which could be in a negative aspect.
Okay.
So gradually we'll be introduced towards that.
Yes, yes, yes. So that means there is we see innocence in we see because we are trying to understand Lenny's perspective here. So we are trying to feel what Lenny is feeling. So we are trying to experience the innocence that Lenny is trying to express, and because she is the entire narrative in the entire novel, so we are trying to feel that innocence here. So innocence becomes one of the theme, no doubt. The the what, whatever you mentioned, that is also an important theme. Besides, there is the depiction of a conflict which is supposed to happen, but it is just giving us some idea that is somehow soon it is going to happen. So there is a sensory perception, and likewise there are a lot of themes which we can see. So we have to understand the passage in a very deeper level, so that we exactly understand what the narrative wants to express in order to get the themes and issues. So likewise, so let's carry on. So the number one theme here in chapter 1 is innocence and experience, the observations, Lenny's observation. But there are hints of, again, complex and often troubling world that she will soon encounter. This is one of the theme. Sensory perception is the second, because she has described all her senses, emphasizing how she interacts with the world through touch, smell, sight, etc. So this chapter also focuses on uh, the childlike perspective that underscores the importance of the physical environment in shaping her understanding of the world. Now there is a beautiful theme of identity and belonging. With her relationship with Aya and her observation of the people around her, Lenny begins to explore her sense of identity. The diverse cultural backdrop of Lahore, with its mixture of religions and communities, introduces the theme of identity, which is also how becomes prominent as the story develops. And while the chapter appears to depict a very peaceful and an idyllic world, there are again some hints that we could sense, like for the example, dirt, soil, scents, beneath the surface. So they are all elements of decay and tension. So this is a foreshadowing theme which also we can see, and that clearly suggests that there are some dramatic events that will follow. So moving now to chapter 2. Chapter 2, the summary, uh, is where Lenny reflects on her life and her relationships with the key figures around her, particularly her Aya, Shanta. Through Lenny's observations, the reader gains insight into the social dynamics of her household and the broader community in Lahore. The chapter is characterized by Lenny's innocence, yet perceptive descriptions of the people she loves and the world she is gradually understanding. The chapter also sets the stage for the complex interplay of relationships and the socio political context that will unfold throughout the novel. The chapter um, also talks about the vibrancy and diversity, where there will be subtle tensions underlying the daily life. This is also gradually uh, put forward in this chapter. Lenny's mother and godmother, they are also briefly introduced, providing a glimpse into the matriarchal figures who influence Lenny's upbringing. The chapter touches on the social hierarchies and the intersection of different religions and cultural identities in the household and beyond. Lenny's observations are mix of acute awareness, laying the groundwork for the novel's exploration, and childlike innocence. Let's study the lines of the chapter. Chapter 2. Aya is an object of adoration. Men admire her bold way of walking, her dusky complexion, and her sensual allure. Now, this line highlights Aya's physical beauty and the attention she garners from men. Lenny's description, though innocent, captures the magnetic presence of Aya in the social sphere. This line is significant because it foreshadows Aya's central role in the unfolding narrative, particularly as the communal tensions arise. Aya's allure and the attention she attracts from men of various communities symbolize the complex dynamics of desire and power in a society on the brink of communal violence. I watch Aya's every move. I mimic her gestures, her laughter. I want to be like her. This is such an innocent line as spoken by Lenny's deep admiration and almost idolization of her Aya. For Lenny, Aya represents an ideal of femininity and strength. This relationship is significant because it underscores Lenny's emotional dependence on Aya, which later adds to the emotional weight of the story as the partition impact unfolds. It also illustrates the innocence of Lenny's perspective, which contrasts sharply with the harsh realities that she will witness. In our house, there is no discrimination. Mother and godmother treat Aya with the same respect as they would treat any family member. This line is also crucial because it tells the relatively progressive nature of Lenny's household, where the servants are treated with dignity and respect. This contrast with the broader societal hierarchies and prejudices that are prevalent outside the home. The line introduces the theme of social class and the intersection of personal relationships with societal structures, which becomes more pronounced as the story progresses. Godmother's house is a sanctuary. Within its walls, I feel safe, protected from the outside world. The depiction of Godmother's house as a sanctuary symbolizes the safety and stability that Lenny associates with a family circle. The sanctuary becomes increasingly important as the external world grows more chaotic and dangerous with the onset of partition. The idea of a sanctuary also ties into the theme of refugee and protection, which is central to the experiences of many characters in the novel. This chapter is important in establishing the foundational relationships and setting the tone for the narrative. It introduces key characters and provides insights to Lenny's world, which is both secure and vulnerable. The chapter also foreshadows the disruption of this world due to the impending partition, highlighting the fragility of the social fabric. The significance lies in the way it captures the innocence of Lenny's perspective, which will be increasingly challenged by the brutal realities of communal violence and displacement. So, important themes besides innocence and experience, we can see there is social hierarchy and class, the interactions between Lenny's family and servants, especially Aya, touch on the theme of class and social hierarchy. Respect is shown to Aya in Lenny's household. This contrasts with the broader societal norms, highlighting the disparities and tensions that will come later to the forefront. Moving to chapter 3. First, the summary. Ice Candy Man introduces in chapter 3. Okay, yeah. So in chapter 3, we come to know about the social dynamics and the multicultural environment of Lahore, setting the stage for the complexities of partition that will unfold later on. The chapter focuses on Lenny's interaction with Aya and the various men who are drawn to her. These men come from different religions and social backgrounds, representing the diverse fabric of pre partition Lahore. Lenny, although a child, is perceptive and curious. She watches the way these men behave around Aya and begins to understand the power of beauty and desire. The chapter subtly hints at the underlying tensions between different communities, though at this stage, these tensions are still contained within the boundaries of social interactions. This chapter also highlights the innocence of Lenny, who is trying to make sense of the adult world around her. It sets up the contrasting worlds of childhood, innocence, and adult complexity, a theme that runs throughout the novel. Aya looks jolt, even the eyes candy man, into speechlessness. This line highlights the effect of Aya's beauty on the men around her. The ice candy man, usually quick with his words, is rendered silent by her presence. This emphasizes the power dynamics in this chapter where Aya, despite her position as a servant, holds a certain power over the men because of her beauty. The ice candy man's reaction foreshadows his deeper obsession with Aya, which will have significant consequences later. The men circle around her like flies around a honey pot. The simile used here, comparing the men to flies, suggests their most animalistic attraction to Aya. It reflects how they are drawn to her beauty in a way that is instinctual and somewhat uncontrollable. This imagery also foreshadows the darker side of this attraction, as it hints at the potential for possessiveness and violence that can arise from such intense desire. I try to hide behind Aya's dupatta as the men's voices rise and fall in a strange, hypnotic rhythm. Lenny's attempt to hide behind Aya's dupatta symbolizes her desire for protection and her innocence. The rising and falling of the men's voices, described as hypnotic, creates a sense of foreboding. Lenny is both fascinated and frightened by the adult world she is witnessing, and this moment encapsulates the tension between her childlike curiosity and the unsettling reality of adult interactions. The city is vast, unknowable place, and I am but a small part of its mystery. This reflection by Annie reveals her awareness of the complexity of the world around her. Lahore, with its diverse population and hidden tensions, represents a microcosm of the larger political and social changes happening. Lenny's sense of being a small part of a larger mystery foreshadows her role as an observer of the catastrophic events of partition, which she will witness with a mixture of confusion and insight. Chapter 3 is establishing the cultural and the social setting, and also it is introducing the readers Lenny's observation, the relationship between different communities, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Parsis, coexisting peacefully, yet with underlying tensions. And it focuses on Aya and her admirers, and also introduces the theme of desire, power, and objectification of women, which will become central as the story progresses. Some of the major themes here is desire and power, and cultural religious diversity, and partition, objectification of women. These are some of the essential themes and issues. Coming next to chapter 4. Chapter 4, the story continues to unfold through the eyes of Lenny, who is both an observer and participant in the events around her. This chapter focuses on the daily interactions between Aya and her admirers, particularly the Ice Candy Man and the Monsieur. The dynamic between these characters begin to reveal deeper undercurrents of tension and desire, set against a backdrop of an increasingly volatile socio political environment. As of now, how do you like the character of Lenny? As of now, what are your views regarding the character Lenny? How do you find Lenny? Yes, anyone would like to answer this? No? So we are yet to receive how is the personality of Lenny, because we are seeing Lenny just as a child, and how she is gradually and eventually getting to understand the nuances of relationships. So how she is understanding the complexities, and how she is trying to simmer herself around the situations that are happening. So, okay, so let's move to chapter 4. Here the story continues here the story continues, and here we see that there is a backdrop set for an increasingly pressurized socio-political environment. And here the larger narrative part includes or highlights the multicultural and multi-religious society that is very much on the brink of disruption due to the impending partition. Um, Now, here we also find Aya's continued interactions with all her admirers belonging from different backgrounds, and this serves actually as a metaphor for the fragile coexistence of these communities. This chapter is rich in subtle hints of the growing communal tensions, but it also maintains a focus on the personal, with Lenny's observations providing a window into the adult world of love, jealousy, and rivalry. Aya's adoration is a tonic, a balm, a rebuke, a punishment, a celebration, a feast. Now, this line encapsulates the complex emotions that Aya evokes in her admirers. Her presence is almost intoxicating, offering them solace and excitement in equal pressure. The use of the words like tonic, balm suggests that Aya provides comfort, while rebuke and punishment hint at the frustration and jealousy she can also inspire. This duality reflects the broader societal tensions of the time, where relationships and interactions are fraught with both affection and conflict. Lenny does not understand the sexual undercurrents that flow between Aya and her men, but she senses the power dynamics at play. Now, here in this line, Lenny's innocence is highlighted. She observes the adult world without fully comprehending it. The sexual undercurrents represent the unspoken desires and tensions that shape the relationships around her. Lenny's perspective allows the reader to see these dynamics from a distance, emphasizing the complexity of human interactions. This also serves as a metaphor for the political tensions of the time, felt but not fully understood by the general populace. The ice candy man's eyes linger on Aya with a mix of longing and something darker, a possessiveness that hints at future danger. Now, this line is clear enough that foreshadows the ice candy man's darker nature, which will become more prominent as the story progresses. His possessiveness is a key element of his character, suggesting that his affection for Aya could easily turn into something more sinister. This moment foreshadows the violence and betrayal that will later erupt and mirror the broader betrayal and violence of the partition. Monsieur, with his gentle touch, is the calm in the storm, but even he cannot hold back the forces that are gathering. The Monsieur represent a counterpoint to an ice candy man, embodying gentleness and care. However, this line suggests that his goodness is not enough to counterbalance the growing tensions. The forces that are gathering symbolize the both personal conflicts within the group of admirers and the larger socio political upheaval. This hints at the inevitability of the coming chaos despite the presence of more peaceful influences. Chapter 4 is significant because it has some themes and issues like it shows themes and issues like communal tensions, and there are personal dynamics which are reflected of the larger societal tensions which will lead to partition. There is a desire and possession as a theme, particularly through the character of Ice Candy Man himself. His intense emotions hints at the darker side of the love and attraction, which can easily turn destructive. There is also an issue of gender dynamics. The gender dynamics of the time, particularly through Aya's relationships with her admirers. Aya, as a woman, becomes an object of desire and control, reflecting the broader issues of women's agency and autonomy in a patriarchal society. And there is cultural coexistence, different religious communities are there are both harmony and both underlying tension, pointing the fragility of this balance. This is one of the issue. There is a nice national crisis, foreshadowing of national crisis. This is one of the issue too, subtly alludes to the larger national crisis that will soon engulf all the characters. The personal rivalries and tensions, they serve as the microcosm of broader societal conflicts, making this chapter a crucial part of the novel's build up to partition. Next, we move to chapter 5, where we are introduced to Ice Candy Man. Now, this chapter is important because it introduces the character of Ice Candy Man, setting the stage for his complex role in the novel. His interactions with Lenny and the other characters begin to reveal the social dynamics of Lahore and hint at the coming turmoil. The lines like, "He was always a cheerful sight, this ice candy man. His cart, laden with brightly colored ice lollies, was like a mobile festival. His voice, calling out to children, was full of warmth and promise." This line introduces the ice candy man, describing him as a figure of joy and entertainment in the neighborhood. He is a street vendor who brings colorful ice lollies to the children, including Lenny. Here, the speaker is Lenny, the narrator of the novel. As a child, she perceives Ice Candy Man with a sense of wonder and delight. Lenny's description of Ice Candy Man as a cheerful sight and his cart as a mobile festival highlights his role as a source of happiness and excitement for the children. This initial portrayal establishes him as a beloved character in the community and hints at his positive influence on their lives. The warm and inviting tone of his voice conveys a sense of security and friendliness, contrasting sharply with his later transformation into a figure of menace and chaos. The Ice Candy Man would stop by our house often, and he always had a story to tell. He knew how to make us laugh and how to capture our imagination with tales of far off places and daring adventures. This line details the Ice Candy Man's interactions with Lenny and other children. He engages them with stories and games, enhancing his role as a charismatic and engaging figure in their lives. Lenny narrates this line, reflects on her experience with the Ice Candy Man, and she explains how Ice Candy Man's storytelling abilities and his skill in entertaining the children contribute to his charm and popularity. His tales of far off places and daring adventures serve as a means of captivating the children's imagination and creating a sense of wonder. This portrayal establishes him as a figure who brings joy and escapism, thereby deepening the reader's sense of his initial positive influence. He had a way of making even the dullest day seem bright. His clothes were always clean, his smile infectious, and his manner always polite. He seemed like a person who could never do any wrong. This passage describes the Ice Candy Man's appearance and demeanor. He, the way he used to present himself to community, especially to the children. Lenny is providing her perspective on Ice Candy Man's outward appearance and behavior. The description, clean clothes, and infectious smile creates an image of someone who is both respectable and trustworthy. His polite manner further reinforces his positive images. This portrayal is crucial as it contrasts with his later actions, highlighting how appearances can be deceptive. This line sets up a sense of security and trust that is later shattered by his involvement in violence and betrayal. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the Ice Candy Man. He was a fixture of our daily lives, a familiar face who brought a touch of sweetness to our otherwise ordinary days. The passage emphasizes the Ice Candy Man's integral role in the local community and his daily presence in the lives of the residents. Lenny narrates this, reflecting on the Ice Candy Man's status within the neighborhood. His position as a fixture in the neighborhood underscores his significance to the community. His role in bringing a touch of sweetness to daily life illustrates his impact on the residents' routines and well being. This sense of familiarity and routine is disrupted as the story progresses, highlighting the depth of the betrayal that occurs when its true nature is revealed. The passage sets the stage for understanding how deeply the community is affected by his transformation and the subsequent turmoil. This chapter serves to establish the Ice Candy Man as a multifaceted character whose initial charm and positive influence contrast sharply with his later actions. They provide insights into his role within the community and the way he is perceived by Lenny and the other children. The contrast between his initial portrayal and his eventual transformation into a figure of violence and betrayal enhances the novel's exploration of the complexities of human nature and the impact of historical events on personal relationships. Moving on to chapter 6, the focus in chapter 6 remains on the daily life in Lahore, with the tensions of the impending partition beginning to seep into the narrative. The chapter continues to explore the social dynamics between Lenny, her family, the various men who frequent their home to court Aya. These men, representing again different religions, different communities, are depicted as harmlessly competing for Aya's attention. However, their underlying tension of communal division starts to become apparent. This chapter subtly hints at the growing unease among the characters as the political situation deteriorates. The interactions between the characters reflect the larger societal changes, with religious identities beginning to take on more significance. This shift foreshadows the tragic events that will come up later in the novel. The men flock around Aya like flies to honey. Each one competes for her attention, their differences forgotten in her presence. But beneath the surface, something darker stirs. This line highlights the temporary unity among the men who admire Aya despite their different religious backgrounds. However, the mention of something darker hints at the underlying communal tensions that are starting to brew. The imagery of flies to honey suggests both the men's attraction to Aya and the inevitable nature of their conflict, foreshadowing the violence that will later erupt. Aya's laughter rings out, a sound of joy and freedom, but I sense a shadow, an intangible threat that lingers just beyond her side. Aya's laughter here represents the innocence and the joy of daily life, but Lenny's perception of shadow suggests her growing awareness of the unrest brewing in society. The contrast between Aya's outward happiness and the intangible threat reflects the tension between the normalcy of their lives and the impending chaos of partition. Ice Candy Man's eyes follow Aya with a hunger that makes me shiver. It is as if he sees something more in her than just beauty, as if he sees a symbol, a prize, a possession. Ice Candy Man's gaze is described with a hunger that is unsettling to Lenny. This description not only reflects his obsession with Aya but also symbolizes the growing possessiveness and objectification that will characterize the relationships between different communities during partition. Aya, in this sense, becomes a metaphor for the land itself, coveted and fought over. Mature hands, gentle and skilled, work away the knots in Aya's back. But I wonder if he can massage away the tension that hangs heavy in the air, the fear that grips my heart. Mature hands represents healing and care here, in contrast to the ice candy man's predatory gaze. However, Lenny's reflection on the tension that cannot be massaged away underscores the inevitability of the conflict. The fear that Lenny's feel is a foreshadowing of the violence and division that will soon tear apart their world. This chapter is significant because it marks the transition from the relative calm of daily life to creeping realization that something terrible is on the horizon. The chapter serves as a microcosm of the larger societal shifts happening at the time. Through Lenny's observations, the reader begins to see the first signs of communal divisions that will culminate into horrors of partition. This chapter also deepens the characterizations of the Ice Candy Man and Monsieur, contrasting their different approaches to Aya and by extension to life. The Ice Candy Man's possessiveness and Monsieur gentleness represent the opposing force of aggression and peace that are at play in the society around them. The themes that can be pointed out here in chapter 6, the communal tension, that is growing divide between religious communities, innocence versus awareness. Lenny is narrative about the tension between childhood innocence and the growing innocence of the world of adult complexities. There is objectification and possession. Aya is increasingly seen not just as a person but as an object of desire and possession, mirroring the way that land and people are treated during the partition. Again, we find a sense of foreshadowing, which subtly hints the violence and uphill that are to come. The imagery of shadows, hunger, tension all point to the inevitable conflict that will shatter the character's life. We move to chapter 7. Chapter 7, where the social dynamics among the characters surrounding Aya become more pronounced. The chapter captures the daily interactions at Leonie's house, where a variety of men from different religions they keep on coming, and this includes both Ice Candy Man, and the Monsieur, who represent diverse and the vibrant community. Lenny, with her innocent curiosity, observes these interactions closely. She notices the subtle competition between Ice Candy Man and Monsieur for Aya's attention, which adds a layer of tension to the narrative. The chapter subtly highlights the underlying tensions of the time, through these tensions are still largely in the background compared to the everyday life portrayed. Then we also see there is a note of uncertainty as Lenny begins to sense the changes in the air, the integrity of the men who visit Aya, although it is still intact, but there is an unspoken tension that suggests the coming chaos. Aya's admirers gather in the garden like a motley crew. Each of them, in his own way, is enchanted by her beauty, yet none is able to claim her. This line reflects the diversity of Aya's admirers who come from different backgrounds but are united in their attraction to her. The garden becomes a microcosm of pre partition Lahore, where communities coexist peacefully, where the inability of any of the admirers to claim Aya foreshadows the looming conflict that will disrupt this harmony. Ice Candy Man's eyes follow Aya wherever she goes, a possessiveness in his gaze that unsettles even Lenny. The possessiveness in Ice Candy Man's gaze hints at his growing obsession with Aya, which will later become the central plot. This moment also reveals Lenny's perceptiveness. Despite her young age, she senses the dark emotions at the play. The excerpt foreshadows the darker turn Ice Candy Man's character will take as a political situation worsens. Monsieur's hands are gentle as she massages Aya's feet, a silent offering of his affection. So, in all these lines of chapter 7, 8, and 9 mostly, we see how almost all time Aya is surrounded by men who would want to own her, who are possessive for her. But here, in contrast, we see there is a Monsieur whose actions are more tender and respectful. And then in the upcoming chapters, we also see the growing tensions that indicates the underlying anxiety that will soon erupt. So this continues till chapter 9 and then starts the major part of the plot. So we take a break now and then we begin with the major part where we see actually the tension starts. So please take a break, have some water, have some tea, then we come back. Can we resume? So before taking the break, we discussed about chapter 7, where we could see that how there is a calm before the storm that portrays a society which is almost on the brink of upheaval. The chapter illustrates the delicate balance of relationships in pre-partition Lahore, where people of different faiths and backgrounds still interact harmoniously. However, the subtle tensions and possessiveness displayed by the characters like Ice Candy Man hint at the violence and betrayal that we will see later on. So that was chapter 7. Now we move to chapter 8, where Sidhwa continues to develop a complex narrative of partition through the eyes of Lenny, the young Parsi girl. Now, this chapter highlights the growing tensions and divisions with the Indian subcontinent as the reality of partition begins to take shape. The chapter primarily focuses on the subtle shifts in relationships and the changing dynamics among Lenny's family, friends, acquaintances as the political landscape alters. Lenny's innocence and curiosity lead her to observe the changes in the adults around her, including the Ice Candy Man, her Aya, and others. The chapter captures the sense of foreboding and the underlying tension that pervades the atmosphere, even though Lenny may not fully grasp the gravity of the situation. Through Lenny's perspective, the reader witnesses the slow but inevitable unraveling of societal bonds, as well as the beginning of communal divisions that will eventually culminate. So, let's discuss some lines from the chapter. I can sense a change in the air, an unease, a tension that I don't quite understand. The adults speak in hushed tones, their faces drawn with worry, but no one explains anything to me. I am left to piece together the fragments of conversations and the shifting moods around me. This excerpt reflects Lenny's growing awareness of the changing world around her. The change in the air symbolizes the onset of the political and the social upheaval that will soon engulf the subcontinent. Lenny's confusion and her attempts to make sense of the adult world highlights her innocence and the limited understanding that children often have in time of crisis. This passage sets the tone for the chapter, emphasizing the disconnect between the adult world and the child's perspective. The unease and tension foreshadow the coming violence and societal breakdown. The Ice Candy Man is different now. His jovial nature seems forced, his smiles strained. I notice how he glances over his shoulder more often, as if expecting something or someone unwelcome. The change in the Ice Candy Man's demeanor is significant as it mirrors the broader shifts occurring in society. His forced joviality and nervous glances suggest that he too is affected by the mounting tension and is perhaps fearful of the future. The Ice Candy Man's transformation is a microcosm of the larger societal change, where one's friendly relationships are now tinged with suspicion and fear. This passage underscores the theme of changing identities and the impact of external forces on personal relationships. Aya, usually so cheerful and full of life, seems quieter these days. She goes about her tasks with a sort of resignation, as if she knows something terrible is coming but is powerless to stop it. Aya's changed behavior reflects the pervasive sense of dread that hangs over the community. Her resignation suggests a loss of hope and a recognition of inevitability of the coming turmoil. Aya's character, often seen as a symbol of warmth and care, now embodies the anxiety and helplessness that many feel in the face of impending disaster. This excerpt highlights the theme of powerlessness and the sense of foreboding that permeates the narrative as the characters brace themselves for the unknown. Conversations are no longer light-hearted. Even the children's games seem to lack the usual joy. It's as if the weight of what's to come has already settled on our shoulders, though we don't yet know its name. This passage captures the collective consciousness of the community as it grapples with the uncertainty of the future. The shift in conversations and the loss of joy in children's games signify the deepening impact of the political situation on everyday life. The weight mentioned here is metaphorical, representing the burden of fear and anticipation that affects even the youngest members of the society. This excerpt reinforces the theme of loss of innocence and the intrusion of political realities into the private sphere. Chapter 8 is important in the narrative of Ice Candy Man's Eyes as it marks the beginning of the overt changes in the character's life due to the impending partition. The subtle shifts in behavior, the growing tensions, and the sense of foreboding serve to build the narrative towards the more dramatic events that will follow. This chapter is crucial for setting the stage for the unfolding tragedy as it captures the initial cracks in the fabric of society that will eventually lead to its disintegration. We see clearly there is a loss of innocence, and this becomes the central theme of this chapter, particularly through Lenny's perspective, as she becomes more aware of the unease around. Lenny's childlike understanding of the world begins to be challenged. This theme is reinforced by the changes in the adult's behavior. There is a foreshadowing of violence. It foreshadows the violence and chaos that will come with partition. The tension described through this chapter suggests that something ominous is on the horizon, even if it is not yet fully understood by the characters. Relationships getting changed. There is a transformation in the Ice Candy Man's demeanor, and Aya's resignation highlight the theme of changing relationships. As the political situation worsens, the characters begin to alter their behavior, reflecting the broader societal changes. This theme underscores the fragility of human connections in time of crisis. There is powerlessness and fear also as a theme, another significant issue which is explored in this chapter. Aya's resignation and the community's general unease reflect a recognition that they are caught in the tide of history, unable to control the events that are about to unfold. This theme is central to understanding the psychological impact of partition on individuals and communities. We jump on to chapter 10, where we see there is rising tensions. Each lines in this chapter is insightful regarding the communal tensions and the broader impact of the partition. The streets, once filled with laughter and the sound of friendly banter, now echoed with a tense silence. People spoke in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact as they passed one another. The air was thick with an unspoken dread. This excerpt describes the shift in the atmosphere of Lahore as the communal tensions intensify. The once lively streets now reflect a palpable sense of unease. The changes in the city are clear enough that Lenny is trying to narrate. Lenny conveys the growing anxiety and fear that pervades the community as the partition nears. The description of the tense silence and the unspoken dread highlights the disintegration of previously harmonious environment, emphasizing the novel's theme of how political and communal conflicts disrupt social cohesion. Neighbors who once shared meals and celebrated festivals together now looked at each other with suspicion. Conversations about the partition became more frequent, and each word seemed to carry a new weight of potential conflict. This passage focuses on the deterioration of communal relationships. It illustrates how everyday interactions are now tainted by the growing discord brought on by the partition. Lenny observes the changing dynamics in her community. Lenny wants to convey how the impending partition has eroded the trust and camaraderie that once existed among neighbors. The suspicion and weight of conversations about partition reflects the novel's theme of how political upheavals can fracture personal and communal bonds. Rumors of violence began to spread, each tale more horrifying than the last. The sense of security that once enveloped the city was replaced by a pervasive fear of what was to come. Even the children, once carefree, felt the shift in the atmosphere. This passage highlights the spread of fear and rumors as the threat of violence becomes more imminent. It shows how even the most innocent aspects of life are affected by the communal unrest. Lenny recounts the impact of the growing violence on the community. The purpose is to illustrate how fear and rumors disrupt everyday life and erode the sense of safety previously enjoyed by the residents. This excerpt emphasizes the theme of how violence and political strife penetrate all levels of society, affecting both adults and children. Adults speculated about the future, wondering whether they would be able to keep their families safe. The once vibrant discussion about cultural and local news were now overshadowed by talks of survival and escape. This passage portrays the shift in adult conversation from cultural and social topics to concerns about safety and survival. It reflects the serious impact of communal tensions on daily life. Lenny observes the change in adult conversations. She conveys the shift from normal everyday discussion to those dominated by fear and uncertainty. This change highlights the theme of how deeply political conflicts can disrupt personal and communal life, turning vibrant discussions into anxious deliberations about safety. These lines are from chapter 10, which vividly capture the growing communal tensions and their impacts on the lives of Lahore residents. Through Lenny's observations, the narrative conveys the shift from harmony to fear and suspicion, illustrating the novel's exploration of how political and communal strife affect everyday interactions and relationships. We jump to chapter 13 of Ice Candy Man, also known as the garden scene. Now, this passage is where we will analyze in terms of its context, the speaker, and what they want to convey. In chapter 13, Lenny's garden was a colorful blend of people. The air was filled with laughter of children from different backgrounds: Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, and Parsis. It was a space where religious boundaries seemed to dissolve into the warmth of human connection. This passage describes the harmonious and inclusive environment of Lenny's garden, where people from various religions come together. Lenny's observation highlights the initial harmony and unity among the communities. The colorful blend of people and laughter of children symbolize the ideal of multicultural coexistence. This peaceful interaction contrasts sharply with violence that will later engulf these societies, emphasizing the theme of lost innocence and the fragility of social harmony. The garden serves a microcosm of the broader societal peace that will be disrupted by the partition. Aya was the center of attention, surrounded by a mix of admirers who were drawn to her beauty and vivacity. She moved gracefully among the group, her laughter ringing out like music in the garden. Her presence brought everyone together, momentarily forgetting their differences. This is where Lenny is trying to recall how Aya used to be the center of attention, how Aya's central role in the entire novel influenced bridging between people. Her ability to bring together a diverse group and momentarily erase religious differences. How she used to highlight the theme of unity through her beauty and the ideal of harmonious coexistence. Her laughter and graceful presence symbolize the potential for personal connection to transcend societal barriers. Lenny is recalling all of them. The garden was alive with chatter and the clinking of glasses. Conversations flowed effortlessly, with jokes and stories shared across religious divides. It was a rare moment of genuine integrity where each person was simply another human being. This passage captures the lively and the convivial atmosphere in Lenny's garden, where people interact across different lines. Alive with chatter and clinking of glasses, convey a sense of carefree environment, mutual respect from among the guests, the ease of conversation, sharing of stories across religion divides, symbolize the possibility of peaceful coexistence and mutual understanding. This scene stands in stark contrast to the violence and division that has already followed, illustrating the theme of how communal harmony is shattered by external forces. As the sun begins to set, casting a golden glow over the garden, there was a palpable sense of nostalgia for a time when such gatherings could be taken for granted. Little did we know that the harmony we enjoyed would soon be replaced by discord and distrust. Lenny reflects on the scene where there is an imagery of the setting sun and the golden glow that evokes a sense of nostalgia and the transient nature of peace experienced in the garden. The narrator's reflection on how this harmony will soon be replaced or has already been replaced by discord and distrust serves as the impending violence. This moment of reflection emphasizes the novel's theme of the fragility of human connections and the rapid deterioration of societal harmony due to political and communal tensions. Chapter 13 poignantly captures the initial harmony and the multicultural integration of Lenny's garden. They illustrate the contrast between the peaceful interactions of the characters and the violence that emerge sooner, highlighting themes of unity, the fragility of peace, and the impact of communal discord. Each line in this chapter contributes to the novel's exploration of how quickly social harmony can be disrupted by external conflicts and the loss of innocence that accompanies such transformation. We jump to chapter 8, where we see a sudden death of Monsieur, the good man, who was a symbolic representation of respect. In certain in chapter 18, the brutal murder of Monsieur is a crucial turning point that symbolizes the shift from communal tension to outright violence. The most important lines from chapter 18, that is what we will be discussing on. The Monsieur's lifeless body was found in the alley behind our house. It was a sight no one should have to see. His face, once so full of warmth and affection, now frozen in a grimace of pain. This line describes the discovery of Monsieur's body. The scene is narrated with a focus on the physical appearance of the body and the emotional impact of the discovery. Lenny is narrating as a young girl whose observations provide a poignant and innocent perspective on the horrific event. Lenny describes Monsieur's lifeless body underscores the stark transformation from his previous gentle demeanor to the violence inflicted upon him. The imagery of his grimace of pain highlights the brutality of the murder and the loss of the warmth he once represented. This passage conveys the profound shock and horror of the event, emphasizing the collapse of the peaceful community and the onset of violence. Rumors of his death spread quickly, and soon the whole neighborhood was in turmoil. People who had once greeted each other warmly now exchanged fearful glances and whispered accusations. This passage captures the immediate aftermath of Monsieur's death, focusing on the reaction of the community and the subsequent breakdown of social cohesion. The speaker is reflecting on the broader impact of the murder on the community. The rapid spread of rumors and the shift from friendly interactions to suspicion and fear illustrates how Monsieur's death exacerbates the communal tension. The passage highlights the collapse of social harmony and the beginning of mistrust among neighbors, reflecting the broader theme of how personal tragedies can escalate into collective chaos and violence. I saw the ice candy man in the crowd, his face twisted with rage and satisfaction. He was no longer the friendly vendor we had known. He had become an instrument of destruction, leading the mob with a fervor that was both terrifying and incomprehensible. This line describes Lenny's observation of the ice candy man during the aftermath of Mercier's murder. Speaker, that is Lenny, provides a direct observation of Ice Candy Man's transformation. The contrast between Ice Candy Man's previous friendly persona and his current role as a leader of the mob reveals his dramatic shift in character. The imagery of his twisted face and the description of his fervor emphasize the deep corruption and moral decay that accompanies the violence of partition. This passage conveys the theme of betrayal and the loss of familiar identities in the face of communal strife. The cries of Monsieur's family pierced the night, mingling with the distant sounds of violence. The grief was palpable, a stark reminder of personal cost of the chaos sweeping through our society. This passage reflects on the impact of Monsieur's death on his family and the surrounding community. Lenny observes the emotional fallout from the murder. Description of Monsieur's family's grief highlights the personal tragedy behind the broader political violence. The cries and the distant sounds of violence emphasize the overlap between personal sorrow and public appeal. This passage underscores the theme of individual suffering amidst larger scale chaos, illustrating how personal losses are magnified during periods of communal violence. Now, these lines from chapter 18 provide a deep insight into the impact of Monsieur's death on the community, the transformation of the ice candy man, the personal grief experienced by those affected. Each passage conveys different aspects of the chapter's significance, from the physical and the emotional impact of the murder to the broader breakdown of societal order and trust. Through Lenny's perspective, the novel illustrates the devastating effects of partition on individuals and their communities. We now jump to chapter 22 of Ice Candy Man, where detailing of Aya's abduction and the context that follows, we do some analysis to that. So, in chapter 22, the lines: the Ice Candy Man stood at the head of the mob, his face shadowed and unrecognizable. The chaos of the street seemed to blur around him. Aya's shrieks pierced the air, but her voice was shallowed by the roar of the crowd. I watched in horror, unable to move, as the mob dragged her away. This passage describes the immediate aftermath of Aya's abduction. The scene unfolds in a chaotic and violent street, with Aya's desperate cries being drowned out by the mob's uproar. The speaker in this passage is Lenny, the protagonist and the narrator, and through her eyes, the reader witnesses the horrifying scene of Aya's abduction. The passage conveys the shock and helplessness Lenny feels as she observes the violence. The contrast between the ice candy man's now shadowed and unrecognizable face and his previous friendly demeanor highlights the stark transformation in his character. Lenny's horror and paralysis emphasize the theme of helplessness in the face of overwhelming violence, and the blurring of the street around the ice candy man symbolizes the loss of order and humanity during the partition. Aya was pleading with the crowd, her voice breaking with fear. Please help me. Don't let them take me. Her eyes darted from face to another, seeking any sign of compassion. But the faces around her were cold and unresponsive. In this passage, Aya is desperately trying to appeal to the crowd for help as she is being abducted. Her pleas are directed at the indifferent mob around her. This passage is also focusing Aya's emotional pleas and the indifference of the crowd. The excerpt conveys the desperation and fear in Aya's voice, contrasting sharply with the cold and unfeeling responses from the crowd. It underscores the theme of betrayal and abandonment, highlighting how communal violence strips away compassion and humanity. Aya's pleas represent the broader suffering of women and innocent individuals caught in the chaos of partition, emphasizing the personal tragedies amidst the political upheaval. I stood frozen and my mind racing. It was my mistake that had led them to her. I had told them where she was hiding. The weight of my betrayal felt like a stone in my chest. I had never imagined that my words could cause such harm. This passage reflects Lenny's realization of her inadvertent role in Aya's abduction. She understands that her earlier actions contributed to Aya's capture. Lenny captures her internal turmoil and guilt. The realization of her mistake and the stone in her chest symbolize the heavy burden of her unintended betrayal. This passage conveys Lenny's deep sense of remorse and the theme of personal responsibility. It highlights the emotional and psychological impact of her actions, showing how her innocence is shattered by the consequences of her words. The passage emphasizes the theme of personal guilt intertwined with the larger tragedy of communal violence. As the mob disappeared into the distance, I was left alone with the echo of Aya's screams. The street was eerily quiet now, and the reality of what had just happened sank in. The familiar world of my childhood was gone, replaced by a landscape of fear and loss. This passage occurs soon after the mob has left with Aya, and Lenny is left alone to process the aftermath of the abduction. Lenny narrates this moment of profound realization. The echo of Aya's screams and the eerie quiet reflect the haunting impact of the violence on Lenny's psyche. The transformation of the once familiar world into a landscape of fear and loss symbolizes the broader integration of stability and security due to the partition. This passage conveys the deep sense of loss and disillusionment experienced by Lenny as she confronts the consequences of the violence that has upended her life. It underscores the theme of trauma and the irreversible impact of communal conflict on personal lives. These passages from chapter 22 provide a powerful insight into the emotional and thematic core of Ice Candy Man. They illustrate the violence and betrayal of partition, Aya's suffering, Lenny's guilt, and the profound impact of the events on the character's life. Each passage in this chapter contributes to the novel's exploration of personal and communal tragedy, highlighting the destructive forces at play during this tumultuous period. We jump to chapter 26. He was no longer the smiling vendor with a twinkle in his eye. His face was hardened, his eye cold and calculating. The once charming ice candy man had become a man driven by obsession and vengeance, and I could see it in the way he looked at Aya. This passage captures the physical and the emotional transformation of Ice Candy Man. The scene likely takes place as he becomes increasingly consumed by his obsession with Aya and his anger towards the changing political and social landscape. Lenny describes the Ice Candy Man's drastic change, transformation from a smiling vendor to a hardened figure with cold and calculating eyes, underscoring the personal and societal upheavals that have corrupted him. The focus on his changed look emphasizes how the partition has altered people's personalities, turning them from benign to threatening. This passage conveys the theme of the loss of humanity and the impact of societal chaos on individual behavior. You think you can betray me and get away with it? He roared, his voice echoing with fury that seemed to come from deep within him. You will pay for what you have done. No one mocks me and lives to tell the tale. This dialogue reflects a moment of confrontation between Ice Candy Man and Aya, or possibly between the Ice Candy Man and another character who has wronged him. The context is a culmination of his vengeful feelings and his sense of betrayal. The Ice Candy Man's angry outburst highlights his deep sense of betrayal and his need for retribution. His threats reveal the intensity of his obsession with Aya and his inability to cope with his perceived slights. The language used shows his belief that personal grievances justify extreme actions. This excerpt reflects the broader theme of how personal vendetta become magnified in terms of societal unrest, leading individuals to commit acts of violence. Iceman Candy stood at the center, directing them with a twisted sense of purpose. His earlier charm was gone, replaced by a chilling command. He was no longer a part of the community, it was its destroyer. This passage describes the Ice Candy Man's role in making significant shift from his previous identity as a harmless vendor to a threatening individual who is instrumental in creating or influencing the violence by larger political and social forces. There is a moral deterioration, and the way his actions now contribute to the destruction of the community. I loved you, he told Aya, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and sorrow. And this is how you repay me? I will make you suffer until you understand the depth of my pain. In this emotional moment, Ice Candy Man expresses his feelings of betrayal and hurt towards Aya. The context is a confrontation where his personal feelings are inadvertent with the broader violence of the partition. The Ice Candy Man's declaration of love, followed by threats of suffering, illustrates the complex interplay between personal relationships and broader societal conflicts. His emotional outburst reflects the intensity of his feelings and the personal nature of his vengeance. The juxtaposition of love and violence demonstrates how personal grievances can become deeply entangled with larger political and social issues. This passage highlights the themes of how personal pain and obsession can drive individuals to commit atrocities. Chapter 26 illustrates the Ice Candy Man's transformation, and the chapter also highlights the major themes like the impact of societal upheaval on personal behavior, the intensity of personal vendettas, and the loss of humanity in time of crisis. We now jump to chapter 30. Aya sat on the edge of the bed, her face hidden in her hands, as the ice candy man paced the room. He had forced her in a corner, making it clear that there was no escape from his fate. You are mine now, he declared, his voice cold and unfeeling. No one will ever take you from me again. In this passage, Aya is depicted in a moment of despair as she is coerced into a forced marriage by Ice Candy Man. The Ice Candy Man's declaration emphasizes the power imbalance and the complete loss of autonomy Aya experiences. Lenny's here is the speaker here is the Ice Candy Man, and his words and actions underscore the brutality and possessiveness of his character. The passage conveys the theme of victimization of women during partition, highlighting Aya's helplessness and the violence inflicted upon her. The Ice Candy Man's cold and unfeeling demeanor reflect the dehumanizing effects of communal conflict, where personal relationships are overshadowed by power and control. As the wedding ceremony progressed, Aya's eyes were red from crying. She looked around the room, hoping for a miracle, but all she saw were indifferent faces, the elaborate decorations, and The celebratory atmosphere felt like a mockery of her suffering. This passage describes Aya's emotional state during her forced wedding ceremony. The contrast between her despair and the celebratory atmosphere around her underscored the disconnect between her suffering and the society's perception of the event. The speaker's perspective here is from an observer or narrator capturing Aya's internal turmoil amidst the external festivities. The passage conveys the theme of dehumanization and objectification of women who are reduced to mere objects of possession in the context of communal violence. The contrast between Aya's suffering and the outward celebration highlights the cruelty of the situation and the indifference of those around her, reinforcing the novel's critique of societal norms and during the times of conflict. Ice Candy Man showed no remorse as he paraded Aya around his home. She belongs to me now, he boasted among his friends who cheered on him. She is a symbol of my victory. His words echoed with a sense of cruelty, stripping Aya of her dignity and humanity. In this passage, Ice Candy Man flaunts his possession of Aya to others, treating her as a trophy rather than a human being. This moment reflects his complete disregard of her personal suffering and autonomy. The speaker here is the Ice Candy Man whose boastful declarations illustrates his moral corruption and the objectification of Aya. His attitude reflects the broader theme of how communal violence leads to the dehumanization of individuals, particularly women. The sense of cruelty in his words underscores the theme of power and control, showing how the violence of partition is internalized and manifested in personal relationships. Lenny stood outside the door, her heart heavy with guilt. She had unintentionally revealed Aya's hiding place, leading to this tragic turn of events. I never meant for this to happen, she whispered to herself, the weight of her mistake bearing down on her. How could I have known? This passage captures Lenny's feelings of guilt and self reproach after Aya's abduction. Lenny reflects on her inadvertent role in Aya's suffering, revealing her internal conflict and regret. Lenny expresses her remorse and guilt over the consequences of her actions. This passage highlights the theme of innocence and guilt as Lenny's unintentional betrayal contributes to Aya's suffering. It underscores the novel's exploration of how personal actions and decisions can have far reaching and devastating effects, particularly in the context of larger societal conflicts. Lenny's internal struggle reflects the broader impact of partition on individuals, emphasizing the emotional and psychological toll of such historical events. Chapter 30 illustrated the devastating consequences of Aya's abduction and forced marriage. They convey themes of victimization, dehumanization, and guilt, highlighting the profound impact of partition on individuals and relationships. We now jump to chapter 32, the last one, the last chapter. As we arrived at the safe house, I could see Aya sitting in a corner, her face pale and her eyes hollow. She looked up as we entered, and though her expression was one of relief, it was clear she was still in shock. This passage describes the moment when Lenny's family reaches the safe house where Aya has been taken after her abduction. Lenny and her family find Aya in a state of distress and trauma. Lenny narrates the scene with a mix of relief and sorrow. Lenny wants to convey the profound emotional psychological impact of Aya's ordeal. Despite the physical safety offered by the safe house, Aya's condition reflects the deep emotional scars left by the violence and abduction. This passage highlights the theme of trauma and the lingering effects of the partition, illustrating that safety does not necessarily equate to emotional or psychological healing. I looked around at the faces of my family and other refugees, and I realized that none of us would ever be the same again. The world has changed irreparably, and so had we. The safety we had sought was tinged with sadness of what had been lost. In this passage, Lenny reflects on the broader impact of the partition on her family and the refugees in the safe house. She acknowledges the irreversible changes that violence has wrought on their lives. Lenny reflects on the collective trauma experienced by her family and the refugees. Lenny wants to convey the idea that partition has left an indelible mark on everyone involved. The safety they find is overshadowed by profound loss and alteration of their lives. This passage underscores the theme of irreversible change and the ongoing emotional impact of historical events on individuals and communities. Aya held me close and whispered, "Thank you for finding me. But I fear the scars will never fade. I am free, but the world outside is still the same." Her voice was filled with a mix of gratitude and despair. Aya conveys her gratitude to Lenny while simultaneously expressing her deep despair about the world's unchanged nature. Aya's words highlight her sense of liberation from immediate danger, but also acknowledge the ongoing issues and trauma that persist in the world. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about the future. Could we ever truly escape the shadows of what had happened? The world outside might rebuild, but the memories and scars we carried would remain. The impact of the partition was something we would all live with forever. Lenny reflects on the future and the enduring impact of the partition as she tries to come to terms with recent events. Lenny shares her introspective thoughts on the long term effects of the partition. She expresses a sense of uncertainty about whether true escape from the trauma is possible. Lenny's contemplation highlights the novel's theme of enduring psychological and emotional scars, suggesting that while physical safety and recovery may be possible, the psychological impact of such profound events will always persist. The novel underscores the theme of enduring trauma and the challenge of reconciling with the past. Ice Candy Man provides a poignant reflection, and as we come to the end of all the chapters, we reflect to see the resolution of the novel's main events and their aftermath, how each chapter convey the emotional complexity of the characters as they deal with the immediate relief of safety and the long lasting impact of the partition. The novel ties together themes of trauma, loss, identity, beauty, innocence, and the difficulty of achieving true resolution in the face of historical and personal upheaval. We end here with Bapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man. We meet again tomorrow. I'm sorry, we don't meet tomorrow. I think we will meet uh, on Tuesday, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.